In this video, we will talk about the opposite of a number. So first, again, the integer video, we talk about number lines. So first we're going to talk, this is our 0, right? That's really the benchmark. And then on here, we're going to have all positive numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think this is a little uneven. So, and on the other side, we're going to have 1, 2, -1, -2, -3, and -4, and let's try to fit that -5 in here as well. So this is our number line. And if our first example says, so for instance, the opposite of -4 is 4, right? The opposite, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 units here. 1, 2, 3, 4. These are both 4 units from 0, right? This is 0 over here. So the opposite of -4 is 4. So if positive and negative. So again, for example, what is the opposite of 5? Opposite equals -5. Opposite of -3. Opposite equals +3. So if you're talking about opposite number, if it's a negative number, you're going to have to think of it's going to be the positive, right? If it's positive, it'll be negative, right? What does not change the opposite is its distance from 0. That's really the main takeaway. So the opposite of 4, +4, is -4, and the opposite of -4 is 4. What doesn't change is this distance from 0 is still 4 units, right? No matter negative or a positive. Really, that's why 0 is really, really important. Distance from 0 should not change. When I talk about opposite number, like opposite 5, well, it's still gonna, if -5 is still 5 units away, and +5 is still 5 units away from 0. That's really the opposite, right? This is all about integers. Positive integer would change into a negative integer. So now we're going to talk about opposite of the opposite. Opposite of a opposite. Now here, if that's the first example is 3. Let's do 3. The first, your opposite you should be thinking about. Your opposite. So this is what you would do. Opposite. First, you're going to do is opposite of that equals. What's opposite of 3? -3. Now you're going to do another opposite. But this time, it's going to be with the -3. So it's the opposite of the opposite. So your first really was -3. Now the opposite of -3 is 3. So that's really it. So pretty much if we're talking about opposite of opposite, that integer shouldn't change. It should, if it's -3, it should still be -3. If it's a positive number, it should still remain a positive number. It's the opposite of this opposite. So your first, you'll do the opposite of 3, which is -3. And then your next opposite will be the opposite of what is opposite of -3. It's a little complicated, but so in illustrative number 200, the opposite of the first was -100. And then opposite of the opposite, meaning the opposite of -100 was 100. So really, you're not really changing anything if you think about it. It still remains same. Now let's do this one where we have the opposite of 0. Now you can't really make a -0. Your opposite of the opposite really shouldn't change. it should always be 0. Your final answer should be 0 because you can't really change. There is no such thing as negative 0. That's pretty much the benchmark. Now, let's do opposite of opposite, same thing, but -5 in parentheses. So this thing really is telling me it's going to be the opposite of, right? So let me rewrite that actually. So let's put that here. So really this thing is telling me opposite of. How did I know that? Because it was in parentheses -5 and it's the outside of parentheses. So that tells me it's the opposite of. So right now, opposite of -5 is, so the opposite of -5 is 5. Now, this one, if you're talking about the opposite of the opposite, this is really how it should look. It is a little weird, but this is really how it would look like if it was like the opposite of the opposite. But you shouldn't really worry about that one that much because negative, and then -2. So that's really how it should look. And that is equal. That just means the opposite of the opposite, which again shouldn't really change this number. And that's still -2. And if, let's do one more example. Last one, let's just do the opposite of -10. So it's the opposite of -10, and that is equals 10. So this is just a very quick review just to get comfortable with negatives and the opposite of the opposite of the opposite.